This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stifel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Where Do We Go From Here? A series that explores issues that matter, always locally, sometimes regionally, nationally, and to the world at large. This segment is part of our series on climate change. Lou Sitzer, our producer, and all of us here involved have a goal in mind, and that is to bring you the best informed local experts on the subjects that we cover that we possibly can. Why is that? Really, because we think that you might want to ask yourself, where do you go from here and how can you get there? I'm Al Dover, retired Superior Court judge and mediator. My guest tonight is Malaika Bishop, who, full disclosure, beyond being an amazing person, as I'll explain more in a few moments, is also my niece, and I'm happy to say. And at the end of this show, I'm also going to let you know how you can contribute to NCTV and also how you can see some past episodes of this series on climate change. So thanks for watching, and let's get started. Malaika Bishop. Malaika Bishop has been working to create sustainable and just food systems for over 20 years. She joined Sierra Harvest in 2012 and has been co-directing since 2013. Sierra Harvest works to educate, inspire, and connect Nevada County families to fresh, local, seasonal foods. After college, she ran Izzy Martin's first campaign for county supervisor. In 2001, she co-founded The People's Grocery, an organization working to find creative solutions to the food needs in West Oakland by building a local food system and a local economy. When she moved back to Nevada County, she worked on several farms as the farm educator at the Woolman Semester School and served on the board of Briar Patch Co-op for 5 years. Malaika is the mother of 2 boys and maintains a large home garden orchard. Malaika is also the recipient of the Jefferson Award for Public Service. She was chosen by the Whitney Reader, San Francisco Magazine, and Organic Style Magazine as a young visionary and environmental leader. Well, I couldn't agree more with that assessment. I think she is a visionary and environmental leader. And Malaika, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So my first question, really a general question for folks that really haven't thought about this. You know, how are climate change and food related? What is that intersection? Maybe related, why is food relevant to a conversation about climate change?
Well, it's simple, really. About 1/3 of the greenhouse gases that are produced in the world come from the agricultural sector in one way or another. And the U.S. share of that is huge. In the U.S., we consume about as much energy preparing and transporting food as Mexico uses for everything that they do. So changing the way that you eat can have a bigger impact than the way you drive, or if you drive at all, actually, on the climate.
So just drill down a little deeper with that last comment for me. The way one eats can have this big impact. What does that mean?
The choices that you make about what type of food that you eat, and where you get it, and the way it's made.
And then you said in transportation too, so all of that plays in.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to give me a little example?
Well, I'll give you many examples in a minute.
Okay.
But you know, if you're eating a Snickers bar, for example, that chocolate is maybe produced in Mexico and then gets processed somewhere else and then shipped to Switzerland to be made into chocolate, and the milk comes from Holland and the sugar comes from Africa maybe, and all these ingredients come together and then get packaged and then get transported. And so that one product may have all these different environmental impacts. Whereas if you grow a head of lettuce in your garden and eat it, it's a pretty simple transaction there and not as much environmental impact. So that's kind of the difference I'm talking about.
Okay, but I've never tried to get a head of lettuce in my pocket. I've always got my Snickers bars
I know.
right in there. So we'll talk more about that. You've got, what are the biggest sources of GHG, after you tell me what GHG means, what are the biggest sources of those emissions to produce our food?
So when we talk about climate change, we talk about greenhouse gases.
Greenhouse gases.
And so I thought people might want to know, what are these greenhouse gases and what is it that we're talking about that makes them, and why is that bad? Basically, there are four main things when we're talking about food-related greenhouse gas emissions that will change our climate. One is carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Another is methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. So carbon dioxide comes from fossil fuels that are mined and burned for electricity and transportation. And it also comes from land use changes like deforestation. Methane also comes from fossil fuels, but a large part of it comes from animals, cows belching and things like that. And it also comes from landfills, the gases that are produced when things break down in landfills. And then nitrous oxide comes from making synthetic fertilizers, from livestock manure and agricultural runoff.
Okay.
And then there's fluorinated gases that you use for refrigerants and air conditioners and stuff like that. So those are all the biggest greenhouse gases and the main contributors to them when it comes to food.
So in terms of them being the biggest sources to produce our food, you can see how each of those would connect with either transportation or, like you say, with the cattle or other livestock. All right, I think I understand that. I saw in the paper, there was a nice article in the Union not too long ago, and you had 5 top ways that you and I can reduce our food footprint with regard to these greenhouse gases. You want to kind of take us through those, if you would?
Sure. So, I gave a talk recently at the Unitarian Church for the climate group in town. And I kind of did some research and came up with this is not the universal top 5. This is what I think is maybe the top 5. But the first one is value your food. And this comes down to food waste. There's 40% of the food that's produced in this country is not consumed, is wasted.
40%?
40%. So that's like every time you go to the grocery store, you buy 2 bags of food and you leave almost one of them there. Kind of crazy.
Totally.
And they say try to wrap your head around this, but if food waste were a country, it would be the 3rd top contributor of greenhouse gases in the world. So there would be China, there would be the United States, and then there would be food waste.
Yeah, okay, try to wrap your head around that. Hard. That's hard to wrap your head around. It's actually kind of staggering.
Yeah.
So on a very small level, it's just kind of like, I'm piling this food on my plate. Gosh, I've eaten half of it, maybe a little more, I'm full, down the drain. That kind of 40%?
It's all those ways. So it's what you didn't eat that you put in your garbage disposal, but it's also what sat in your fridge for too long that you forgot about. It's also what Safeway didn't put on the shelf because it started looking not as pretty. It's what the farmer didn't even give to Safeway because it didn't look pretty enough. It's all those things.
Well, I hadn't thought about those. I know that's a ton.
Yeah, and then I just saw a YouTube video about this, and the guy was talking about the ends of the bread, and he said, you know, at home you get your bag of bread, and you've got the ends. Do you generally eat the ends, or?
Yeah, a lot of people, no way.
Yeah, but I make an effort, right?
Right.
But in a restaurant, have you ever been served a sandwich that has an end on it?
Not intentionally, no.
Right? So he showed this picture of like this dumpster full of just bread ends, right?
Right.
Because you wouldn't do that in a restaurant. You might, make an effort at home. So it's things like that. Food waste is just so prevalent. And so if we were able to reduce food losses by 30% in the United States, we would be able to feed the 50 million people who are currently going hungry in the United States.
Well, that would be an important thing for people to actually wrap their heads around, because I would imagine there have to be ways to manage some of that waste other than one person just being or trying to be conscientious. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know what all those stores do about throwing away all that food that maybe has been on the shelf that one day too long, but is still actually, although not as pretty, completely edible, in getting it to sources and getting it to people that could actually utilize it.
Well, California's just made a good stride in this regard with the Good Samaritan Food Act, which says if a grocery store has food that they want to donate to someone, they used to have to say, you can feed this to your pigs, but you can't eat it,
right.
Or otherwise we could get sued. Now you're allowed to donate it to a food bank or something like that, and they are not liable for any, sickness that would result. So,
okay.
Baby steps.
Yeah, but those are important baby steps.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think I cut you off after number one.
Okay,
Value your food, so I'll let you go on.
Yep. Number 2 is eat more plants. So about 70% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions come from the production of animal products, so meat, dairy, and eggs. So that's huge, 70% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. So what I like to say about this is it's not just a black and white, you shouldn't eat meat kind of conversation.
Sure.
It's more nuanced than that, where the type of meat that you choose, for example, is going to have, chickens have way smaller greenhouse gas emissions than cows, for example,
Sure.
or goats or somewhere in between. So where you're eating on the food chain makes a big difference. But then how that meat or dairy is produced is a really big factor as well. So as you can imagine, a feedlot, so there's this idea of carbon drawdown, which is what could be taken out of the atmosphere and put back into the earth, right? What can be reabsorbed by beneficial practices. And so you can imagine that a rainforest is going to take up a lot of carbon dioxide, huge amount. And maybe a North American forest is going to do a lot less, but still pretty good. And then a field, a pasture, might do a little less carbon uptake, but decent. Whereas like a mall or a development, very little, a feedlot, very little. So if you think about, your choice of meat, say you're going to buy a hamburger, if it is being produced in a way that they cut down the rainforest in order to raise that cattle, probably not a great plan.
Right.
But if you're here in Nevada County and that cattle is being grazed on land that would otherwise turn into a strip mall, and that agricultural production is keeping that land in agriculture and drawing down carbon, pretty good deal.
Yeah.
So.
And you're getting organic, locally grown, so it doesn't have to be transported.
Exactly. Yeah. So just the things to think about. Also, a huge percentage of the grain that we eat in the United States goes to feeding animals.
Right.
But some animals require more supplemental grain than others. So chickens, for example, you can't just set them out on pasture and have them survive on grass. They need supplemental grain. But goats, you could put out and they'd eat blackberries and be happy, and you don't really need to feed them extra grain. So other things to think about. And another thing is just, if you're going to supplant that protein with another source of protein, what's the impact of that? So if you're going to have a soy burger instead of a hamburger, same thing happens with soy. They cut down rainforests to grow monocrops of soy. So is it coming from that? Then you're still probably not as good a trade-off.
Okay. Do they have hemp burgers? Because I'm switching to a little hemp milk lately and enjoying that, actually. So I'll tell you one thing I heard. This was kind of funny, apropos of this eat more plants. I had a friend say to me, well, I would eat more plants, except, I can't get any protein. I need protein, as if greens don't have protein. And I said, you ever watched a horse? Ever seen a gorilla eat? Do they look like they're suffering from a lack of, protein?
Mm-hmm.
The biggest animals in the world, really, mostly what?
Do
Greens,
okay. Yeah.
Plants, they seem to do all right. I always enjoyed that one. So number 3.
Yeah, so we'll speed it up here. So
You're fine.
Eat whole and bulk foods. So 85% of the energy that is used to produce food comes post-production. So I'm not talking about greenhouse gases now. I'm just talking about energy, like refrigeration, transportation kind of energy. And so that's all the things like getting your milk from the cow to the cooler, to the place that packages it, to the store, and then refrigerating it at home.
Sure.
All of that is 85% of the energy use.
Wow.
So my third one is eat whole foods and bulk foods as much as possible. So just one example is that we'll go back to our head of lettuce. If you bought a head of lettuce at the farmer's market here in town, versus buying one of those packaged bins of lettuce from the grocery store, guess how many times more energy it took to produce the bin of lettuce in the plastic container?
How many more times? I'm going 10.
31.
I was never good at that kind of guessing, but thank you. 31 times. Okay,
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just that, that's like a simple thing that people can do. Plus, it brings up this other issue of plastic.
Right.
And we now have these floating cities of plastic in the ocean, one of which is 2 times the size of Texas.
Yeah, I just saw something, I don't know if it was on a news show or public, I don't know where I saw it, but I saw it, and when you see that kind of thing visually, it is absolutely gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
Awful thing to see. It's just unbelievable. So if we can reduce that anyway, possible.
Right. And I forget the statistic right now, but the ocean takes up something like 70% of the carbon dioxide that's produced into the atmosphere. It's one of the biggest carbon sinks, what they call.
Right.
Holding that. And part of that is all the plant life and animal life that's in the ocean, which if we're spewing plastic is not going to be lasting that long. We have now these dead zones in the ocean. One that's off the coast of Texas that's like the size of New Zealand, where nothing can live anymore because of agricultural runoff and what we're doing to the ocean. And so there is no fish and no plants, and they're not doing their job of sequestering that carbon for us.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we learn a little bit more before we get to that kind of tipping point where generational consequences
Right.
come into play that we
Yeah.
certainly don't want to see for our children or their children.
No, it's definitely, you talk about that tipping point. I feel like the ocean is one of those places where you get to a certain point and it's, it can go a lot quicker,
Yeah.
the damage.
Yeah.
So the next one is eat whole and bulk foods. We talked about that.
Yeah.
And then eat seasonally and close to home.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of on the same thing of 85% of the energy being post-production. If we're eating seasonally, it doesn't need to be refrigerated for months before it comes to us.
Right.
If we're eating close to home, it doesn't have to be transported to us. Pretty simple.
Right, pretty simple. And you know what? So much better. I mean, you look at every if you want to think about best restaurants, guess what? Seasonal, close to home. This is
Yeah.
what they're trying to do so they can
Right.
say to their customers, look, this is the freshest food you could possibly get.
Yeah.
So why not do that for yourself?
Exactly, and that's what I love about this. When I kind of, did the research and started coming up with these things, it's like every single suggestion here is not only good for the climate, but it's better for our health.
Right.
We're going to have more nutrients, we're going to be healthier and more fit, and
Right.
all of that if we do these things. So we can have our, our help for the planet, but
Yeah.
have it be self-focused
Yeah,
too.
win-win.
Yeah.
Nice thing.
Yeah.
And did you get to your number 5?
Number 5, okay, buy organic or sustainably produced foods.
Okay.
So right now there's 1 billion acres of farmland that's been abandoned because of land degradation around the world. And if we were to be able to put that back into production with ecological practices, reforestation, kind of agriculture, we would be able to remove enough carbon from the atmosphere to offset all of the global transportation sector. So
It's remarkable.
and 40% of the agricultural energy use goes to producing chemical fertilizers and pesticides.
Wow.
So it's a huge amount of energy that's being used to produce, these things which are ultimately hurting us and the environment. So if we can choose the practices, and going back to the beef, where if we're choosing beef that's raised sustainably using pastures and rotational grazing and all of that, it's going to help the climate way better. So that's number 5.
Okay. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much, Malaika. Just in terms of the name of the show, where do we go from here? I think if we kind of review 1 through 5 and we actually go there, if we do value our food, if we do eat more plants, if we do look at whole and bulk foods and eating, seasonable food that's close to home, buying organically, and then looking at the issues that you've raised, that wouldn't be a bad place to go from here, would it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important for us to think both personally, like what are we doing in our own households, but also how we're, community-wide, how we're working on these issues. So in California, there were some groups, the California Climate and Agriculture Network, and they helped get this Healthy Soils program enacted that was paying farmers to implement climate-friendly practices like mulching and not tilling as much and having windrows and all the things that are, better going to help sequester more carbon while they're farming. And that's the kind of thing that at the community scale we can really encourage positive practices, because I like the concept that public health has of making the easy choice, the right choice, the easy choice.
Right, nice.
So that if we can, with our public policies, make it easy for people to do things that are better for the climate, then we don't have to, try so hard in every little household.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Malaika. It's been fascinating. I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else has as well.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is our show for tonight. If you think you've learned something or something new, or just appreciate our efforts to get you this important information, then please consider donating to NCTV. You can go to our website to see how. To view past episodes on this series, go to YouTube, Where Do We Go From Here, NCTV. And this program is streamed on Comcast Channel 17 on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Again, thank you, Malaika. Thank you for all of you who are viewing, and good night.